Anything difficult where you have to think is good for your brain. If you ask Usain Bolt, how do I get stronger legs? Run. It's intuitive. But the flesh in our skulls, it's meant to think and feel. And that is the power of self-growth. And it's a thinking machine, it's a thinking flesh that you actually have to use or to protect itself, because it's an energy hog, right? It's 3 pounds, but uses 20%. If you're not using parts of it, it'll program itself to let those parts of the garden wither. So the diversity of thinking and the depth of thinking, just one level past what you're used to, is the way to keep the whole garden flourishing. And it is a garden in there. There's chemicals, there are things moving, there are different types of brain cells. It's not just neurons. So I always try to give that metaphor analogy, if you will, that it's a garden and you have to irrigate it and stimulate and tend to all the corners, particularly the ones you're starting to neglect. Maybe it's your left hand. Getting out of the box and engaging the recesses of your mind is the most important thing. And then you have then the creative things happen. You don't just sit down and have them happen. You got to work and dream and go hard, and on top of that, something creative can happen.
So is there a specific protocol? Like, I know people have said, brush your teeth with your left hand, or one of the coolest things I've ever heard about staving off dementia is to take dance class, because having to do bodily movements, but in a particular rhythm and learning new steps is like sort of the ultimate trifecta for keeping the brain young. Are there things like that? Because people listening right now, they want to write something down. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this.
So now we have the understanding that the brain is meant to think. The brain is also meant to command your body to move. And absolutely, the minute you don't use your left hand, the right parietal lobe with the motor strip says, I'm not getting used much. I'll shave down that density of those brain cells a little bit. So that's where movement's important. So simple things like getting the mouse, using the mouse with your left hand and using your phone with your left hand. It's a powerful technique. And then the other thing is navigation. When you see old people and they lose their way home, well, that has a particular address also. Many things are global in the brain, but navigation is in the temporal lobe, and they have dementia in that area. Navigation also is spatial awareness, is a function of the brain, and sometimes when we're on our phones too much, we don't have that. So my kids, I tell them, don't look down, not religiously or adamantly, but try to just remember our route and just look up and see how far you can get. I think those habits will help us as we get less young. And those are practical things we can do during the day. And as far as the other element is brain training, it doesn't have to be some weird game that's not intuitive. I think brain training just means learning as a habit, one step past where you're comfortable. If you're reading it, you know it, your brain's it's an idle. If it's too hard, it's not even engaged. I'm not even gonna win this race. I'm not gonna kick it in second gear. So just like video games, just good enough to get to the next level, right? They don't hit you with the 5th level, the tilt level up front. It's level 1 to level 2, level 2 to level 3. And that's what learning is. So despite your knowledge and intellect, it's just that level right beyond you that is brain training. So you don't have to buy an app, you just have to challenge yourself and think. The sleep disruption can be quite difficult on the brain. Even if you can get a few hours of sleep, don't do it.
Really?
Yeah. Disrupted sleep as residents. And people can write in, if you can just get an hour or 2, sometimes it's better to stay up the whole night. And it's a story well worn between residents. They pass that on to each other. And the reason is the sleep disruption can be quite difficult on the brain. And so if you're gonna get 5 good hours of sleep, going on to people who aren't in surgical training, maybe that's better than 7 hours of disrupted sleep where your phone is going off and different things are pinging your way. So that's one lesson I think people should understand. So the question is repetition, and I agree, it's not thinking about the mountaintop. You can, by the way you breathe, you can change the electricity in your mind. We've seen that with people we put grids on, like we have actual measurements now. But that's what's the structure where you get the most out of repetition? What is the perfect spot where meditative breathing hits that sweet spot for people? And they'll increase it if it continues to benefit them. But the food, the breathing, sleep is a hard one, but to me, food, what we eat, and meditative breathing, I think are the most graspable and measurable.
Talk about the mind diet.
Yeah.
I found that really interesting in the book.
Yeah, that's well known. So this is not to lose weight. It's what nutrients to put inside you, where if you have 1,000 people here and you have 1,000 people here, and for 20 years they eat differently, what are the numbers of people with dementia, all other things being equal? It essentially says, it doesn't have to be Mediterranean. It just has to be plants, like as I tell my kids, plants, which is, fruit or salad. It doesn't have to be just salad. Yogurt, nuts, lean meats like chicken and salmon.
What is it that salmon has?
Omega-3s. It's the only thing in our literature that we know is a nutritional component in food that is good for brain health. And the omega-3s are a unique type of fat that are, the brain is an extremely fatty organ. And so it needs to have those fats. So omega-3s are the only things nutritionally that I would say is you could supplement or actually add salmon in a couple times a week. So that's the mind diet twist on the heart diet by adding a little bit more emphasis on salmon. What you can't have is a lot of fried processed food. And if you have a cheat day or whatever, you have a burger, it doesn't negate what you've done. I think that's the hardest thing about dieting for people. They feel like the shift has to be complete and religious. And to me, it's more glacial because the benefits will also take decades to accrue. Those are the nutrients that are best for the brain. The exercise stuff is harder for people, but the exercise stuff is in its own way the most important if we can get back to that.
Ooh, why?
Keeps your brain arteries open, releases all these neurotrophic factors inside your brain. So not just the plumbing that irrigates the flesh of the brain.
Tell me about
but
BDNF.
Yeah, they're nerve growth factors. They're all neurotrophic factors, and whatever in this case, would be abbreviations, GDNF, BDNF, NGF. It doesn't matter. They end with GF, growth factors. So it really is. I've heard your word miracle grow, but getting back to the garden analogy, to keep the flesh, we're going to get, electricity is one thing. To keep the flesh healthy, you have to irrigate it. And that has to do with your brain arteries. And since we already said it's not a ball, it's these these jellyfish, and they're moving and they're throbbing and they're pulsating and their tentacles are reaching out. There's a lot of space in between. And that extracellular space outside of the actual cells, outside of the neurons, outside of the jellyfish, if you will, it's not just water. There's chemicals floating around in there. Now, dopamine might be just from tentacle to tentacle, serotonin might be this way. But what's in all the stuff around all those billions and billions of neurons? They're growth factors and minerals and chemicals that the brain naturally has. But there's also a soup that these billions and billions of neurons are floating in. BDNF is a key component of that soup that helps regulate the health of each of those jellyfish or neurons.
And we can trigger more of that through exercise.
Yeah, you exercise and it releases it, it showers itself. It's not like the thigh muscle sends it up to the brain. The brain says, hey, I'm feeling good, this is good, I like this. I'm gonna create a new rut. I'm gonna remind you feel good when you run. The brain will shower itself with growth factors. There are growth factors. The brain says, hey, the electrochemical balance is better with those. So I think that's where you get the runner's high. It's not just adrenaline. It's not dopamine is a happy chemical. I'm jacked up, I'm on adrenaline. It's just such a complex ecosystem. And rather than feeling intimidated by that, to me, I just see opportunities on how people can, improve their lives.